This is Rick Rule for Rule Investment Media, sponsors and producers of the Natural Resource Investment Symposium in Boca Raton, Florida, July 23rd through 27th. This interview is part of an ongoing series of CEO interviews where we interview the companies that will be exhibiting at the Natural Resources Investment Forum. A note to the listeners, I am a shareholder in Centaurus and, in fact, in all of the exhibitors at the Natural Resources Investment Forum. Not every stock I buy goes up, of course, but it does mean that I have devoted the time and treasure to understanding these companies, and they are, in fact, vetted. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to Darren Gordon, CEO of Centaurus, an emerging, I believe, Tier 1 sulfide nickel developer located in Brazil, but domiciled and traded in Australia. Darren, thank you for subjecting yourself to this interview. And thank you, too, for your ongoing support and sponsorship. Great.
No problem.
Let's begin.
It's really good to be involved with the conference.
Well, thank you so much for that. We look forward to introducing you to a lot of people who will become your partners over time. I want to begin by asking you something about your history in mining and some of the key members of your team. It's important, I think, that we back people who have been prior successes in activities closely related to the task at hand. So tell us something about the genesis of Centaurus and the people.
Yeah, look, I guess we've been operating in Brazil now for about 15 years and started out life looking at iron ore assets here, but more recently have been able to evolve into this very nice nickel sulfide asset in the Carajás. I think the important thing with that is the team that's sort of been built up over time. And I've got a couple of guys, our head of exploration, our country manager here in Brazil, who have been with us since 2010. So Bruno Scarpelli is our country manager, got a very deep background in environmental approvals, worked for Vale previously at S11D and their Lobo operations. And then Roger, who's sort of headed up the exploration team, done all the work on making this discovery and building upon this tier 1 asset that we now have at Jaguar. And he sort of has had history in Brazil, lived in Brazil for over 10 years, initially working with Mirabella Nickel on their nickel sulfide project here, and so brings a lot of deep experience. I think the other thing now is we're really starting to build out an operations type team. So Wayne Foote heads up our operations. We've got a project manager, designated to the project called Mick Ryan, who's done a lot of work with hydrometallurgy. So yeah, really building out the team nicely, good strong team in place, both in Perth and also in Brazil. Hopefully gives the investors the confidence that we actually can get on and build this project.
Let's get to the project itself. Darren, I note from your most recent presentation that third-party reports suggest a 2.2 billion Australian dollar net present value with an indicated internal rate of return on an annualized basis well in excess of 90%. And that's an after-tax number, not a pre-tax number. Yep. It seems to me that that's pretty attractive, particularly relative to your market cap. If you could describe the project a little bit and defend the statement that it's a tier 1 world-class asset.
Yeah, look, I think if I was going to take by literal definition, world-class asset probably needs to be 1 million tonnes of contained nickel metal. We're at 948,000 tonnes right now, so it's probably one of the best undeveloped nickel sulfide projects globally. I think the disconnect that comes between what is perceived value coming through, what was it, those numbers coming out of a scoping study, we're now sort of progressing through doing definitive feasibility study work, and I think those numbers will be able to be confirmed when we deliver that feasibility study at the end of the year. But looking at it right now, when you're starting with that sheer volume of nickel metal, it does really put it in a very nice space with not many people being able to compete for the size and scale of the project. So we think we're going to make a lot of money over a long period of time. I think we're just in that typical phase of development where you're going through study type work, It gets a little bit boring for investors sometimes. Our job obviously is to come along and talk to guys like yourself and your investors that follow you, and really try to demonstrate that gap is way too wide. That what we have in front of us is going to make a lot of money over a long period of time, and hopefully that gap closes and we get closer to those NPV type numbers.
Darren, it's interesting that you use the phrase boring. I suggest that boring is the polar opposite to being terrified. So I personally prefer to be bored than terrified. But let's get back to the deposit a little bit. When you talk about contained nickel, the people tend to act like all in situ resources are the same. But in fact, your nickel would appear to be extractable by modern standards in an open pit, which is to say, in addition to the fact that you have tons and grade, it would appear that the engineering means that your nickel, at least as I read the study, would probably be delivered to the market at the lowest cost quartile and the highest internal rate of return quartile of any development nickel project in the planet. Is that accurate? I don't want to give your pitch for you, but I've spent a lot of time because I own a lot of stock.
Yeah, absolutely. No, look, it's very true. I think when you line up these projects side by side, and there's a lot of very large nickel sulfide projects in North America, but their grade is a lot lower than where we are. I think there's a number of higher grade, smaller type projects that are in Australia, but they just don't have the sheer volume of metal that we've got. So I think we're in a really nice position where we've got big volume, but still relatively high grade in an open pit, which obviously when you're starting out life, it's much easier to start in an open pit than in the underground. And I think the interesting thing here is that, we probably had a 13-year project life back in the scoping study. I reckon that's going to be pushing out much further than that, given the increases that we've had in the size of the resource. And even beyond that resource, we're seeing mineralization at depth that is going to suggest that we will have an underground mine post maybe 20-year type mine life. So it is a very unique deposit in the sense of the size and scale. And I think when we delivered this feasibility study, I think the economics are really going to shine.
A lot of nickel investors, perhaps particularly developed world nickel investors, believe that the place you want to be for nickel is either the Canadian Shield or Kambalda in Australia. If you could tell us something about the Carajás district and its mining history and its mining infrastructure, I think that would go a long way towards addressing the perceived politics.
Yeah, look, I think this is one of the unique things about Brazil. It's a very big country. It's got a lot of mineral endowment. But if you're in Brazil and you're looking to be in the resource space, the Carajás is exactly where you want to be. And I think that even extends on a global basis. It is one of the premier mining districts globally. And I say that with a lot of confidence that, Vale have been operating in this region for over 50 years. Very, very large iron ore deposits. S11D is there, 90 million plus tons a year. You've got Lobo is their largest copper mine in Brazil. They're probably pushing up towards 35 million tons a year. Other copper deposits, nickel deposits, and if you look more recently at what Vale is doing with the spin out between their base metals and their iron ore, you're seeing that a lot of those assets that are in that base metal business are in the Carajás mineral province. And so what you get is a deep history of them building projects, which means you've got, airstrips where you can fly a 737 jet, land there. You've got a population base in the hub of the Carajás called Parauapebas, which is about 250,000 people. So you've got a ready-made workforce, people that have been working in the mining industry for 2-3 generations now. So we don't feel like there's any shortage of labour. There's high voltage power, sealed roads, plenty of water in that region. So you've got all the key ingredients to actually building a project. We feel like we're just going to be able to sort of move on and participate in that. And I guess acquiring the project from Vale in the first place means that we're not going to see any impediments from them trying to block us into any of these things. So you put all of that together and you got, the perfect situation to develop what is one of the biggest undeveloped nickel sulfide projects globally.
So Darren, let's talk about upcoming catalysts. I suspect that the feasibility study will be one such catalyst. But tell us what we could look forward to in the next 12 to 18 months that will increase the market's confidence in the value of the deposit and hopefully cause the share price to go up.
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of things prior to the feasibility study which will be important for the market to see. One is getting through the environmental approval process, which is well in train. It's a time-driven thing more than anything in our mind to get through that, but it's still going to be a key ingredient for investors to have the confidence that that can be done. I think the other side of it is the offtake agreement. At the moment, Vale have offtake rights for the project, and we're working with them as to what we do with that and how that all evolves. So getting clarity into the market around what's happening with that offtake, because clearly they're an A-grade offtake partner in their own right. So there's a few things like that. I think the resource will continue to grow. We probably won't increase the resource prior to the feasibility study being delivered because it creates issues with your feasibility study. But I'd say very soon after the delivery of the feasibility study, we'll be in a position to pick up all the drilling that we've done over the last sort of 9 to 12 months and put that into an updated resource, which then hopefully pushes that out beyond that nice million tons of contained nickel metal type number. Heading into that, it's going to be into all of those things that you'll see with developing asset, doing your feed work, actually getting in and doing the build, ordering long lead items. So once you actually start to do those things, I think you're just showing more and more the de-risking steps along the way, and I think that's where the huge value appreciation can come from.
Your market capitalization seems absurdly low relative to your net present value.
Yep.
Will you have to finance in the next 12 months, or are we going to be able to get through the next 12 months without any equity dilution?
No, I think there'll be some equity dilution there. I mean, we've had the end of last quarter 23 million Australian dollars. That obviously gets us a fair way down the path, but prior to making that investment decision, which is not targeted until Q3 next year, then there's probably going to be a need. That being said, I think there's definitely options available to us now because of what we're actually trying to develop in a nickel sulfide asset, producing sulfate going into the battery market, that potentially partnering type conversations might alleviate some of that need to be able to dive into and I guess dilute shareholders more than they need to be. So look, we don't shy away from the fact you might need to raise more capital, but we obviously want to do it at the right valuations at the right time, and now certainly is not ideal for that.
Darren, finally, we like our listeners to have living, breathing human contacts within a company to generate a sort of a curated relationship with the company. Who might that be, and how might our investors contact them?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've first and foremost, they can contact me. I work closely with my investor relations people, both external and internal. So Brooke Edwards is head of investor relations in our Perth office. Nicholas Reed Corporate helps us out from an external perspective. They can be a point of contact, but obviously, all buck stops with me. And if there's, questions from investors, then always happy to hear them and address them as best we can. Anyone in our team at any given point in time should be able to, be contacted and be able to answer a question. But I'll try to deal with those in the first instance.
The best answer, of course, is the CEO, you. And how does our audience reach you, Darren?
Yeah, look, I think it's through our webpage. We have access to all of the subscription. You can leave your contact details there. My email's available. generally through the web page as well. So I think any of those forums are the best way to approach us in the first instance. There's a general office email address as well, if that's how people might want to contact.
And your website address?
Yep, it's just centaurus.com.au.
Great.
Pretty simple.
Darren, thank you so much for participating in this process and in your sponsorship of the Natural Resources Investment Forum. I look forward to hosting you in Boca Raton.
Yeah, look forward to being there, Rick. And yeah, it's been a great pleasure just to introduce the story and look forward to it.